Hello everyone. My name is Sachin. As you've just been told, I welcome you to this webinar where we'll discuss React and why you should have it in your web development toolkit. Let's talk about web applications. So, what are web applications in general? Web applications, quite simply, are applications that run in your web browser and are typically written using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Our core aim here is to provide an experience that is somewhat similar to desktop applications, but right from within your web browser, such as Chrome. While the application runs in your web browser, it does interact with a server, it does interact with an API as the backend, as and when it needs to fetch and store data. Sorry. These apps that you see here, some of them, some of these popular apps, the icons that you see on the screen, these have become a part of our lives now. I mean, for instance, Google Mail or Gmail had the first mover advantage of transforming the web-based email experience when it was launched. And it did so by offering an amazing user experience, right? In fact, user experience is one of the key driving factors behind the evolution of web applications. I'm sure everyone has used at least one of these services. Back in the day, Microsoft's Office suite of applications were an essential component of our corporate lives. Today, if you see, Microsoft has extended that experience and have made these apps universally available on desktop, mobile, and in the web browser as web applications. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of web apps. There are thousands of web applications out there, from shopping sites, ERP, CRM, time tracking, project management, and even collaborative coding platforms. Web applications are essential for a good online experience these days. As a developer, your stage is the web browser. And as a result, you are building your applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So in a way, you're building a website that does a whole lot more than typical websites of yesteryears. And one of the key driving factors behind the success of web apps is universal availability. I mean, all you need is a web browser and an internet connection, and you're good to go as a user. This is the reason why most software products these days are built as mobile and web applications first, with optional desktop counterparts. And again, part of the reason why we have web apps is because browsers have become powerful and fast over the years. This is important because once again, we come back to the issue of performance, and performance is critical to a good user experience. So having said that, having established that the browser is our stage, how do browsers work? So let's take a very high level overview. At the very high level, it all begins with HTML, which your browser processes. It parses into the document object model, or the DOM. And quite simply, the DOM is an interface that allows us to manipulate the outcome of HTML. And we need this for two things. First up, we need to style the raw HTML so that it visually looks the way we want to in the browser. And second, we want our JavaScript code to be able to manipulate the contents of this HTML. So that is where interactivity comes into the picture. The JavaScript engine that you have in your web browser is responsible for reading your JavaScript code, and it parses that code and it manipulates the DOM. And here I should mention that this DOM manipulation can get somewhat expensive, and that is by design. So if you've got a lot of elements and you need to rapidly select them, manipulate them, the entire user experience can get hindered. And when you visit a website that hosts a web application, essentially what happens is this source code downloads into your web browser, which is where it runs, and it gives you the power of interactivity and performance. So this way, everything runs locally in your browser, and the only round trips made to the server are to fetch or store data. But let's face it, designing efficient web applications can be quite hard. I mean, for all the benefits, great user experience, and success that a web app can bring to your business, and this is what we've been talking about, designing one can be quite daunting. So this is because you need to focus on three broad goals here. Number one, your web application should be performant, and it should deliver on the promise of a stellar user experience, or else its core purpose is defeated. I mean, why would you want to use an application in the browser which does not offer a good user experience, and you're frustrated at the end? So user frustration is not needed. What you need to have is good user experiences. Number two, your application should be scalable. As your business grows, your customers tell you what they want to see. And collectively, using their feedback and, of course, your own vision and your own roadmap for the product, you have to add and enhance features and capabilities. Your application's architecture here should also allow your product to scale rapidly and systematically without breaking things down. And this brings us to the last point. Maintaining your application shouldn't become a hurdle. Okay, so these are the three core things that we focus on when we build applications. Now, what are the core components of a web application? So let's take a 10,000 feet overview to understand what we're dealing with before we bring React into the picture. So to begin with, we are talking about two major stakeholders here, the back end and the front end. At the proverbial back end, we have, at the least, we've got our APIs, services, and the database. This is your persistent source of data that you need to assimilate, process, and compile in order to display on the front end, which is where your web application is, which is where your client-side JavaScript application is. When we talk about the backend, we typically talk about code written using Node.js, Python, Java, or even PHP, and several other languages and platforms, Ruby, Ruby on Rails, etc. We're also talking about database engines like MongoDB, MySQL, and several others. This code is typically deployed on a cloud-based server instance, or it could be just a microservice, such as a bunch of functions deployed on Amazon's Lambda service, or a host of other options that are out there. And at the front end of this stack, we've obviously got our web application that is built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And you typically use a JavaScript library or a framework instead of writing everything from scratch. So this is where React, Angular, Vue, or Svelte comes into the picture. This combination of the backend and the front end is sometimes referred to as full stack. And if you're using Node.js at the backend, which lets you write server-side code in JavaScript, then you also get the advantage of working with a common language for building both the backend and the front end. And the front end side, the front end application here in this picture, as I said earlier, gets downloaded from the server into your browser, and it provides all the interactive features of the application. And it then talks to the backend network of APIs, services, database, etc., whenever it needs to fetch, store, or process data. So this is again an oversimplification, but that's typically how it works. But for our purposes and focus, let's now look at the front end and the JavaScript application itself. So broadly speaking, what are we talking about here? Broadly speaking, when we build a front end JavaScript application, we are talking about four major focus zones. The first and the foremost, and the most obvious, your application must be able to render a user interface. Okay, so this is probably the most simplest thing to understand. What you see and interact with in the browser is a user interface which consists of forms, buttons, tables, images, videos, several other elements. And one of the key responsibilities of your application is to be able to render and manipulate your interface as efficiently as possible, even when a large number of elements are involved. So imagine that you've got something like Facebook, and you've got so many elements on the screen. Your application must be able to efficiently render and manipulate all that. This is because we are talking about the document object model here and how efficiently your application can work with it. So talking about Facebook, you've got a timeline with lots of posts, like, share, and comment buttons, forms, notification feeds, friends list, your birthdays, events. So many things are there on the screen. And ultimately, Facebook as an application has to render, update, and allow you to interact with all these elements as well, all at the same time. And this kind of a setup can have a performance cost. And this is something that your application must be able to address. And this is something which you need to be worried about. And since your application has to display and process data, it must be able to manage all this data for driving the UI as well as for manipulation. So this is obviously the heart and soul of your application. I mean, when you open your Google Mail or your Outlook inbox in the browser, the JavaScript app fetches this chunk of data that ultimately ends up on the screen. The same goes for any web application that is out there. So your app allows you to edit, delete, and transform this data as needed. And to be able to do these manipulations without killing performance is key. And in obviously, in addition to that, coming back to something like Facebook or Google Mail, not only is management of data critical, but the way it flows in your application is equally important as well. Because ultimately, what your application is a collection of components and features. And all these components and features that are out there, they have to cohesively work together as well. That's how ultimately you end up building a product. You have so many different features which the user works with, but at the back, they are all individual components that have to work together. So architecting this data flow and of course the overall application architecture, both of them are critically important pieces of the puzzle as well. And what good is in an application, if it doesn't let users interact with it? So events are obviously an important part of the entire process. So we're talking about mouse clicks, your form submissions, keyboard events, browser window scroll events, and several others which are there, which are obviously important to the whole user experience. And last but not the least, your app needs to talk to your backend, to the APIs, to other services on the web. And therefore, handling network requests and subsequently applying the outcome of those requests, the data that you receive from the APIs on the data model that finally renders your UI, updates your UI, is equally important as well. So overall, all these things must go hand in hand and work together. And that is your broad goal as a front-end application developer, right? I'm sure all of you understand this. But then, the next obvious question is, how do we build these fantastic apps? Okay, so we're talking about applications that work in the web browser. So how do we build these magical products? So let's talk about fundamental practical approaches here. Remember that we are talking about writing applications using JavaScript. So the most basic answer, obviously, the most fundamental answer is that you're using HTML, CSS, and plain vanilla JavaScript to build these apps. I mean, that's what these apps are, right? At their core. The only problem is that for most parts, you might just end up reinventing the wheel every single time that you have to build an application. In general, there's nothing that cannot be built using vanilla JS, but it will just end up as a fairly complicated and time-consuming exercise that may require extremely careful planning and application architecture design. So this is akin to, I like to think of it as akin to building each and every component of a car, from the engine to the windshield, electrical wiring, everything from scratch yourself, right? So in practice, you don't do that. In practice, you've got components that you assemble together, and you get these components from vendors, from ancillaries, from specialized teams, specialized groups, and these groups have carefully designed, built, and tested each component, ensuring that it adheres to your design and specs. So you don't reinvent the wheel every time. So what else can you do to reduce redundancy and avoid building everything from scratch? Well, and this is something which I'm pretty sure as developers you'll disagree with this, but uh, in my experience working with several students, several newbies, I've come across this as the answer as well. And most people here, I'm sure, have heard or used something called jQuery over the years. This is ancient tech now. A lot of developers are actually misled to believe that jQuery is a replacement for JavaScript. Trust me, I've heard this. So back in the day, jQuery was touted as the solution to reduce redundant code. And this is because jQuery is nothing more than a library of functions that help you implement common features such as event listeners, DOM manipulation, and updates such as animation, etc. But what jQuery is simply sugar over raw JavaScript functions. So this neither promotes good development practices, nor does it help with performance. And often you end up writing spaghetti code, which is basically code that you write today and you won't recognize it 6 months from now. So we don't want that to happen. And the result is often a mess that does not scale, is tough to maintain and debug as well. And it basically does not help with performance either. You see, modern JavaScript applications are modular in nature, which means that they are made up of these small micro units, these components. They have to cohesively work together as well. This ultimately lets you build structured applications that follow concrete design principles, which means you can scale up the application without pain. And your code is not only easy to recognize and read, but is easy to debug and maintain as well in the long term. And these apps are built for performance by trying to overcome various bottlenecks and pain points that typically come into the picture when dealing with DOM manipulation and data management in the browser. And besides that, modern applications are built using modern JavaScript features, which means you should be which means that you should be writing code that is future safe and efficient as much as possible. And this is typically made possible these days by sophisticated tool chains, which are a set of tools and utilities that help you understand and write structured applications quickly using modern JavaScript and efficient coding practices. So the question still remains here. How do you ensure structured development of web applications where architecture, things like architecture, performance, scalability, and maintainability is guaranteed? Well, this is where libraries and frameworks such as React, Angular, Vue, and Svelte come into the picture. These libraries and frameworks are designed to solve common pain points that are associated with developing, maintaining, and scaling a web application and the overall application architecture as well. And to come back to the slide once again, these frameworks let you design modular, structured, scalable applications that are highly performant. And obviously, they use modern JavaScript features. They also offer a stellar developer experience, which is very, very important because you don't want to be pulling your hair when you're writing these applications. You're not building an application for a week or for a day. You're doing that as an ongoing activity. You're building a product that has to last. So a good developer experience is key. And this is what ultimately leads us to React. Okay, so let's start with the official definition first. What is React? So React is a JavaScript library for designing composable user interfaces and applications, and it was built and is maintained by Facebook. So I'll come back to the word composable in just a bit, but for now, I want to stress on the word JavaScript library here. You see, libraries are essentially a collection of reusable functions. Ultimately, that's what they are. And you can call these libraries in your code when needed. So this is opposed to a framework which governs and controls how you design an application architecture, and consequently, a framework can be opinionated. Angular, for instance, is a framework, while React is technically a library. So what are the origins of React? So React was originally created by Jordan Walk at Facebook in 2011 as a JavaScript port of XHP, which was a composable component library for PHP, and it was called Fax.js in its early iteration, and it was used for building a newsfeed element on Facebook. So this was the genesis of an idea that ultimately became React in 2012 when Facebook started using it in Facebook ads. Before that, Fax.js was used, as I said, for a newsfeed component. And but things really started taking shape in 2012 and 2013, and that's because in 2013 Facebook open sourced React at JSConf, and it started gaining necessary visibility and acclaim as well. And by 2015, React was being used by Airbnb, Netflix, and several other companies out there. And this list keeps growing all the time. By 2017, React introduced a brand new algorithm named Fiber. And Fiber actually pushed the performance benchmarks of this library. And this continues to grow. So React continues to grow. It offers a stellar developer experience, which, as I said, is very, very important for you as an enterprise. And of course, it offers fantastic performance for the end user as well. So who uses React? Ultimately, the proof of the pudding is in eating. So who uses React? I mean, tens of thousands of companies out there, both big and small. So whether you're a startup or you're an established enterprise, uh, React is there. React powers these big products. And you can see big names here like Netflix, Slack, Uber, Lyft, LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, and so many more. And this isn't even an exhaustive list. I mean, their confidence is also because React was battle hardened at Facebook. And with every new product that is built, this confidence is only reinforced for good. In fact, at KnowledgeHut, a learning platform. We've got an integrated learning platform that we've built, which is very unique to our organization. And that platform has been built using React and the ecosystem. So what can you do with React? Okay, what is the core purpose? Why should you be using React? At its core, React allows you to build reusable components that can be composed together to build interfaces. So at its very fundamental level, it is a UI library. Here you can see how components are created and they can be composed together for building comprehensive interfaces. And this process ultimately reduces complexity, allowing you to individually build, test, and evolve components. And you can build once and repurpose components across your application. In fact, not just that, you can even build components as standalone features and they can be shared with the community. So React has got a fantastic worldwide community of developers, and that's one of the reasons why it's very popular. And the community keeps building these features, these ready to plug in products which can be brought into your application and just used right away. So your work, your time to market improves. And reusability is obviously, I'm sure as developers you've already built reusable code. It's quite addictive once you get to play with it. uh, you can also you basically build UIs here that are driven by data. So what you see on the left is an array of posts that render the UI on the right. So as a hypothetical example, and this data set on the left is basically known as state. And what you're trying to do here is, uh, the moment you add an object to this array or you modify this array, this automatically updates the UI that you see on the right. Okay, so and this is often called as declarative programming, where you do not need to worry about update to the DOM yourself, because that is what React does that for you. All you have to do is manage and update the data that drives these changes to the interface. And React will take care of all the updates, optimistic updates to the UI, and how they must be implemented internally. So all you have to do is worry about the data and the flow and how data flows in your application, and all the rest is managed very efficiently by React. And the components that we saw earlier, the diagram of the components. So JavaScript applications that run in the browser are called single page applications, because there's typically one HTML page that loads up your application code, which then renders the application on the screen. But the app still provides a traditional website like experience. So I'm talking about navigating to unique URLs and bookmarking URLs and all that using the back button in your browser. And by composing together these components, you build comprehensive single page applications with React. And you can also implement a router which allows your app to work just like a regular website. So your users can bookmark specific URLs and they can use standard browser features which they have been using on traditional websites. So the user experience, again, it boils down to user experience. So when you're offering a good user experience, all these things matter, all these things are key. And how fast you can implement these features into your product is also very important. And React is very fast. React is able to do that quickly. But why do you need React in the first place? So again, going back to the document object model, what makes it so special? Why is it able to offer good performance? Well, whenever you want to manipulate content on your page using JavaScript, as we discussed earlier, and as you already know, the JavaScript engine in your browser has to interact with the DOM, the interface. And as we discussed earlier, that this interface is not the most efficient. I mean, you can run into bottlenecks very quickly if you have a very large number of elements that have to be simultaneously manipulated. So when this happens, your application's performance suffers and it delivers a bad user experience. So this part, the manipulation part, can really become a bottleneck for you. What React does, on the other hand, is it integrates a virtual DOM, which is basically a representation of the real DOM in memory. And this is something which many frameworks and libraries actually do. But React's implementation of the virtual DOM, the fiber architecture that is called technically, is very, very efficient. And whatever updates are required to be implemented are computed efficiently in the virtual DOM. Again, this is a very high level oversimplification of the concept, but whatever modification you need to do. Let's say you want to insert 3 elements, modify 2, delete 1. All that is computed in memory in the virtual DOM. They are batched together, and ultimately the outcome is compared with the real DOM at that stage. And whatever is necessary for the updates to be applied, the difference is then finally applied to the real DOM in an efficient way. So ultimately, what you get is efficient manipulation of the DOM, and it leads to good user experience, a stellar user experience, and that is what we are after. So why React? Coming back to the same question again and again. So why React? Why you should be spending your time learning React, adopting React into your enterprise? Why is React a good choice for you? So if you're specifically, if you're a decision maker, why should you be choosing React? So let's lay down some facts here. Now, React is relatively easy to learn. It has a comparatively shallower learning curve than several other frameworks that are out there, and that makes it a great choice because it speeds up your time to market, which is great. I mean, ultimately in production, that's what you're aiming at. With React, as we saw earlier, we build composable and reusable components. These components bring order and structure to your application's architecture. And once again, the reusability part means that you can build complete features that can be written once, and you can use them as many number of times as you want. React allows you to build declarative UIs. We discussed this briefly earlier as well, where data drives changes to the UI. So you have to be concerned with the data, and you don't have to worry about how your DOM works, which element to select, and implement selective manipulation and all that. So you just need to focus on the data that your app has to display and the events that are associated with it, and your UI responds accordingly. And all these updates are efficiently applied, so performance does not suffer at all, which is something that you would need to worry about if you're building apps from scratch using JavaScript. And React's virtual DOM is what makes it happen. So it ensures optimal performance even when rendering many elements that must frequently update. And React isn't a side project, so it has been battle hardened at Facebook for many years, and has been in use for years, which is why you can bank on its stability. I mean, not only at Facebook, we saw that grid of companies, both large and small, that are using React in their production applications for years now. And this is what makes it a very stable, a very bankable option when you're picking a new library or a framework for your stack, for your enterprise. So this is something which is key. In fact, if you've got access to the new Facebook, I'm not sure, people in India have not got it yet, maybe some of them, but if you have access to the new Facebook, it's a complete rewrite. Previously, facebook.com used to be pretty much a server rendered application with bits and pieces that were written using React. Now what they've done is they've rewritten the entire front end application in React as a client side app. So if you ever get to use it, I've used it, I've seen it. The performance, and if you compare the performance with the current server rendered Facebook, it's a sea change. I mean, you can really see that despite all the bells and whistles and all the the huge number of elements, your timeline feed, your images, video, etc., the app performs beautifully in the browser. It's fast, it's crisp, and it's excellent. So if you get access to it, uh, do check it out. It's built completely using React. And it is also important to mention here that React is not opinionated. I mean, you don't have to learn framework specific syntax, directives, or complicated workflows to get the job done. At the end of it, it's all 100% JavaScript. And you can also, I mean, your existing knowledge of JavaScript is leveraged here. React also comes with something called JSX, which lets you write dynamic UI elements using an HTML-like syntax, but with the added power of JavaScript. So you don't have to learn a very specific templating syntax or anything. It's just plain simple HTML with a few extra bells and whistles, because it's a JavaScript derivative. It's empowered with JavaScript. So since it is JavaScript, ultimately what you're writing are 100% JavaScript functions and the usual features. So your knowledge of JavaScript is fully leveraged here. And if you can write JavaScript, you can build React apps. That it's that simple. You don't have to spend a lot of time in understanding the syntax or learning anything specific. And for TypeScript developers, so if you're an Angular developer, uh, you'll feel right at home. You'll feel right at home. The standard tool chain that we use for building React applications comes with full TypeScript support right out of the box. So you can start building your applications with TypeScript as well. Now, one of the problems with JavaScript apps is that they don't deliver on the promises of search engine optimization, so SEO. And even though in recent years Google's algorithms have become more generous and respectful of JavaScript applications, the general tried and tested way is to deliver a minimal server rendered page, and then once the page loads up, the client side application takes over and delivers the experience, the final experience. So React does allow you to render the application on the server very easily, which then seamlessly can switch to the faster client-side JavaScript app in the web browser, and it still gives you your SEO brownies. So this is something which is very, very helpful as well. And going back to the fact that uh, the entire way that you use React is not opinionated, you can actually bring React as a minimum viable product into your existing projects to test the waters. So as an enterprise, one of the things that is important is why should you be picking a solution over something else? Because within the JavaScript ecosystem, there are hundreds of alternatives for almost anything. Why should you be picking React or Angular or Vue or Svelte? So in this case, because React is a library, you can bring it in on a small feature on your existing project and see what it delivers on, and experience and test the waters before you bring React in for a complete rewrite or building a brand new product from scratch. So this is again something which is a really good feature. And I mean, what can go wrong when you've got a massive community of developers and customers that offer a thriving ecosystem? So once again, this is very, very true for the enterprise. I mean, if you're in a position where you have to pick a library or a framework today for building your applications, then React is a very safe bet because of its massive popularity. We'll check out some trends in just a second. So uh, this huge ecosystem is very, very important, and it reinforces trust in React. And when you pick something, when you pick a solution, it should have a clear and defined roadmap as well for the future. For React, Facebook has a very clear vision, and this is really important because you're not here to build products that will last a month or a week. You build products that will last, and they should evolve with time as well. So you don't want sudden breaking changes to the API and all kinds of issues that are associated with products where you do not have a defined roadmap. So thankfully, React has a very, very rock solid roadmap, and Facebook is very serious about it. And of course, if that wasn't all, you can sorry, you can leverage your knowledge of React to build mobile apps as well for both iOS and Android. And I'm talking about the React Native project here, which lets you use React for building mobile apps quickly. So you can learn React once, and then you can use the same knowledge for building mobile apps. So this can allow you to repurpose your team of React engineers, your team of React developers, and you can quickly train them to build mobile applications as well. So that's productivity which improves. Now let's take a look at some trends regarding React. So we may be all experts, wizards, and Yodas of web development, but I'm sure you agree that we all love Stack Overflow, don't we? Well, React is quite popular here, as you can see on this graph. And here's how it looks on NPM trends. So look at how many number of times React was downloaded over the past 2 years over other competing solutions. We are talking about exponentially more downloads here. And developer satisfaction is key, as I said earlier. And I'll repeat this n number of times, because as developers, you want to work with something that makes the entire experience enjoyable. Okay, and you don't want to be plucking your hairs one by one. And React's developer satisfaction is right there at the top. It's at number one. And it has improved considerably in recent months as React continues to evolve. And it has you have some really interesting features that are there in React's API now that simplifies the entire workflow by a great factor. So what does a React app actually look like? Let's come to the part where I get to show you what a React app looks like. So before we dive in, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them before we jump to our code demo. All right. So I'm going to do a very quick demo wherein we'll build this application which allows you to type a word and press enter, and the app then fetches and displays its dictionary meaning and other things. So we'll use a live API to fetch this data. So let me just switch over to my code editor here. I hope you can see this clearly. So what I'm using here is the standard toolchain, the standard setup that React comes with. There's a utility which Facebook offers called as the create React app utility, and what that does for us is it sets up a tool chain that comes with everything already set up for you. So you've got Babel transpiler, you've got a Webpack, all that is integrated in, so you don't have to go and edit anything, and you don't have to do a hack job of putting together a tool chain. All that is built for you. Having said that, if for some purpose you need to build your own tool chain, you can obviously do that. So React gives you complete flexibility here. So what you see here is straight out of the box the application that you get when you set up a new project. And what it does is it just renders this on the screen, and this is the core, this is the main of the application, this is the main component. Remember, everything that you do in React, everything that you build with React is essentially a component. So what you see here is a component which is called app. And notice something familiar. This is just a standard JavaScript function. There's nothing special to it. It's just standard JavaScript. There's nothing framework specific that we're talking about. We are using standard ECMAScript import statements to bring React in. There are some assets which are being imported in, your CSS, an SVG file, a logo, and what you see here is essentially JSX. So this looks like HTML, is technically not HTML because it lets you incorporate JavaScript expressions. So for example, you can go here and you can do things like what is 2 plus 2, and then I can put curly braces, and what I type here, and when I press save, you can see that it says what is 2 plus 2, it's 4, because what I typed inside of these curly braces is actually computed. It's an expression, so it's computed, and you see the result here. So this is what JSX is. It lets you incorporate JavaScript right within the layout, and it's quite easy to use. There are a few minor things that you need to be worried about. For example, small things like you don't have a class property here. You have a class name property, because class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, and JSX is JavaScript. So what I'm going to do here is, let me switch. Uh, Let me switch to a branch where I have some assets which are already in the project. So these assets are essentially, there are two things that I've brought here. One is a style sheet. So I've removed some files which were there, some of the standard files which were there in the setup. I don't need those files, basic components, basic hello world stuff. I've removed that. We've got a style sheet which I've already prepared, and I've stripped down all the JSX that you saw earlier It's the same application, it's the same setup, nothing has changed. The only thing is that now my function, this component called app, just outputs a simple headline tag which says hello React. Okay, so that's all that we have done here. We've got the style sheet and everything is all there. And we also have an image called preloader, which we will use in just a moment. So the first thing that I need to do is build my basic layout of the application. So as I said, I've already built the style sheet for this purpose. So that will basically help me save time for this demo. So I'm going to start by creating a div, and we'll set the class name to word box. And what that does is it gives me my, give it a second to update. One second. Okay, that's odd. Okay. So what you see here is the canvas is basically a div which has been styled. Within that div, what I'm going to do is we're going to put an h1. We'll say word box here, save, and you can see that the moment you save, your application auto reloads here. So that's your hot reloading server, which comes built into the toolchain by default, saves you time. Let's put an input box here. Input type is text. We'll set the placeholder message as something like type in a word and press enter, like so. Okay, so what you get is an input field. Now what I want to do is, as the user is typing a word here, I want to be able to store that word locally within the component so that I can use that to conduct a search. Okay, and what we'll do here is we will incorporate something called state. So state is a way of saying that this is the data that my React application will monitor, and if there are any changes to this, the component re-renders and updates and implements any changes that may be necessary. And if there are no changes, obviously it won't update anything. If there is no visual change, then it won't update anything. So it's not just a blind update, it is quite optimistic. So I'm going to bring in something called use state, and what we'll do is we'll create a state variable called search keyword, and React allows me to instantly instantiate a function called set search keyword that will be used to update the state. So essentially what I need to do is, as the user is typing in, I need to use this, which is going to be a function, to update the contents of the search keyword, right? And the way you do that is that you have to use events. Now in traditional JavaScript, you have to use something called add event listener. You have to assign an event listener a function, which then does whatever you need to. Here what you'll do is you'll just say on change, and this leads to an expression, and this expression is quite simple. So we will say event, or we'll just type E for short, and what we'll do is we'll say set search keyword, and we'll say e.target.value. So if you've ever done this, you'll recognize e.target.value is nothing different. It's a standard JavaScript. And once this updates my search keyword state variable, what I want to do is I want to plug those things back into my input box, so that what we're saying here is that my input field should stay in sync with the data model inside my React component. And this is required because the input elements, form elements in HTML tend to have their own internal state. So here we want that the updates to the data model in React stay in sync with what I have in the input field as well. So this is what we have. But then we are saying here, type in a word and press enter. So while I update all this and this thing updates, we still need to be able to monitor for when the user presses enter. So and that is as simple as saying on key up. So we'll monitor the key up event, and when that happens, we'll run a function called on search handler. Okay, so where exactly is this search handler? Let's create that, and that will be a standard function. So on search handler also gets event. Okay, let's bring this down to E, and here we'll say that if E dot key is enter. Now see how React makes managing events easier for you. So you don't have to do a event.key code or anything. You can use that as well. That API is also available. But React uses something called as synthetic events, which makes the whole process simpler and uniform across all browsers. So you could be working with any browser, your Edge, Chrome, Firefox, whatever. You get a consistent API for working with events. So if e.key is enter, this is where I perform the search. So what I've done in this example is I'm using an API called owlbot.info. So you can go to owlbot.info. They've got something called as a dictionary API, which you can sign up for, and you get a token which can be then used. You get an authorization token which can be used for performing a dictionary search. So we will use the fetch API. The fetch API is built into browsers. It's also part of the entire toolchain here. So we can use it out of the box. You don't need any third-party library. Having said that, should you wish to use something like Axios, if you're aware of Axios, if you want to use Axios or any other third-party library, just import it in, install it using npm, import it in, and you're good to go. So you don't have to do anything specific. You can just use it straight away. So I'm just going to copy and paste the URL to this API. We're going to do that in template strings, and that's because I'm going to append the search keyword here, because that's what search keyword, that's what we will perform the search with, because whatever the user is typing in here, that's what we're going to search with. And one second. And along with this, we will also dispatch, as I said, that you get a token, an authorization token. We'll also set our headers, authorization token, and I'm just going to copy the token which I have in a file like so. Okay, so once this is done, the next thing that I want to do is I want to, once the promise resolves from this query, we will parse it as JSON, and we will then get our results. And when the results come in, what we want to do is we want to store the results in a similar state variable. And what happens as a result is the moment that state variable is updated with the results, React knows that it has to re-render the component, re-render the application, or at least the parts of the application that have to display the data. So it won't just render, it won't just update the entire application just like that. Okay, it will see what needs to be updated and rendered on the screen, and based on that, it will do the changes. It will perform the updates. So what we'll do is, before I finish that statement, I'll build something called search results, and this comes with a setter function, an updater function called set search results. And once again, we'll use useState. So this useState is, in React, this is called as a hook, and what that allows you to do is to optionally bring React features into your components. Remember, the component here is just a function. Okay, it's as simple as that. It's a function that has to render JSX. It has to render what we call React elements. So once I get the results in, uh, this results is going to be a JSON object, and it should have a property called word, which has for the things. So we'll just use a ternary expression, and we'll say results dot word, and if it's present, then we'll say set search results and just drop the entire thing in it. And if you don't have it, then for our purposes, we'll say alert, I don't recognize this word. And I know I know it's wrong to use alert. You should not be using alert in any of your production grade applications. But again, for this case, it works. Um, I'll skip the catch for handling the errors in this case, just to save on time. But we'll add a finally, and what we want to do here is we, we want to clear out the contents of that input field that we have on the UI. So you type in a word, you press enter, and it performs the search, and then it should clear out the word so that the user can type in another word and perform yet another search. And in this case, because we bound the input element, we set up a connectivity of our input element's value with the search keyword. All you have to do is set the search keyword to blank, and that's it. So now if I go here and if I type any words, and just part my lack of words right now, but let's say something like cars, press enter, there's a brief delay, and then the word vanishes because it has performed the search in the background. When that is done and we reach the finally block, it clears out, and what you get is a blank input field once again. So it's ready to accept yet another word. So now that we have this, a few other things that I can do, but we'll get back to them later. Let's see the results, what we're getting from the API. Now for displaying the results, there are two things that I can do. One is I can build further layout directly within this component, because this is a small application. So even if you pack in a lot of layout directly inside of one component, it will be quite decently manageable. But let's do something better. Let's create a dedicated component which is tasked with just displaying the results that we get from the API. So for doing that, what we'll do is we'll create a folder. So in the source folder where everything resides, where all your application resides, I'm going to create a folder called components. And within components, we'll build something called search results.js, okay, standard JavaScript file. And this component, the job of this component is just to display the results that we get. So this is what we call as a presentational component, where there's no logic that we will incorporate other than the fact that I will get some data from the outside, and all I have to do is just render the data on the screen. So this means that if there are any changes that are required to the visual layout here, all you have to be concerned about is this component and nothing else of the application. So I'm going to start by importing React from React, is which is required. Then we'll say search results is a function, and this function gets what we call props. Props are like inlets. These are like inputs to your this is where the data comes from. And once the data comes in, all you have to do is render a React element, and that React element is basically your user interface. So I'm going to render a div with the class name search results. So this is all UI that I've built already. So and it's got all the styles given in the style sheet. So we'll have this, and I'm going to first put an h2 here, where we'll render the word itself, which is coming in a prop called word. And then we'll render the definitions, which is basically what type of a word is it? Is it a noun or a verb? What is the definition, the dictionary definition of the word, and an example sentence that shows you the usage of that word. So we'll say a div with the class name definitions, that's plural. And here one word could have multiple definitions. So what we get from the API is actually an array. And what I'm going to do here is just very quickly loop over that array, and I'm going to render instances of a div called definition, that's the singular. And all right. And within this, think of it as a box which renders individual definitions of the word. we will render a few span elements. So standard HTML stuff that you see here, nothing fancy, and we'll render value dot type. So this is all coming from the API, and we're just consuming that data here. Okay, we are not doing anything specific. We're just consuming that data. And let me make something called example. We have valid example, and that's it. So that this is my component, and I'm just going to export it out. So this now becomes a self-contained component that will display all the data that we have, and all you have to do is just go to your main file, your main function component, and import it in search results. Okay, and once we import it in, I'm just going to render it here, and when I render, we can do conditional rendering. So what we'll do is we'll say that when you've got search results, that is when you have results to show, then render the search results component, and see how we express components. It's quite simple, and we will pass on search results to this component. Okay, so that's how simple it is. We brought in a component. Now you can see all the layout that we built in the search results, all that sits comfortably in its own file. I don't have to put anything here. So let's go back and do a search. So there's a word which I always use. It's called elemental. So press enter. It takes a while, and you see the results on the screen. So there's the word. There are these multiple definitions of the word, and every definition is a different type. So you've got an adjective, you've got a noun, and you can see the dictionary definition. You can also see a sample use case, an example sentence which shows you how it is used. Okay, so that's how simple it gets. That's your application done. Now let's say you need to scale this application. At some point in time, you might want to add on to this. You might want to add a new feature. So let's say, how about adding a feature which lets the users press an icon, and we hear the pronunciation of a word. So how do you make your application pronounce and speak the word? So in that case, what we'll do is we'll build a new component. So let's build a new component, and I'm going to call this as speak.js. Okay, so this component will be tasked with using the speech synthesis API, which is built into modern browsers such as Chrome. We're not going to use any third-party API. It's your choice again. It depends on what you're doing. But to keep things simple, I'm going to leverage the built-in speech synthesis API, which comes with modern browsers. I'm not sure if you've used that. And we're going to create a very quick component, and this component is going to be 100% reusable, which means that you can take this component, plug it into any React application, just supply a word to this component, and it can speak that out for you using your audio. So let's import React from React, and I'm going to build a function called speak. This thing takes an input called word, because that's the word that you want it to speak. And the first thing it does is it renders an icon. So I'm going to use an emoji here, and let's call it play button. So that's your play button for playing the audio. And if you're going to use emojis, you can use emojis. There are a few other things that need to be done. So I'm going to set the role, the accessibility area label to speak. Yeah, and I'm just going to, I have a copy of the emoji with me. I'm just going to copy that down. Is it 1 second? Yeah. So that's the emoji that I want to use here. And what I want the users to do is to click on this emoji in the UI, and it should speak the word. So this means that we want to look for a click event, that when the user clicks on this icon, what do you want me to do? So in this case, I'll run something called on speak. So on speak is going to be a function, as simple as that. So on speak is just a standard function. And what this function does is it invokes the speech synthesis API in your browser. So window.speechsynthesis.speak. Okay, this is all standard JavaScript, nothing specific to React. New speech synthesis utterance. Have I got the spelling right? And we'll pass in the word. Okay, so we are passing in the word that we are getting from the application or whoever is using this component. And just let's export this out as speak. So now we can go back to the search results, and we want to integrate it here rather than putting it anywhere else. And I'll bring in speak. Okay, and since search results is in the components folder, we can access the file straight away. And I'm going to put it here, I think within the h2. So just say speak word is equal to, what is the word? The word is coming in through a prop called word. And that's it. So once you've built the component, we have it here. So let's see if it works. And hopefully you should be able to hear. So here's our icon. And let me press this.
Elemental.
There you go.
Cars. Fantastic.
All right, so that's how easy it is. And that's a React application. And once you've built this, when you want to deploy, all you have to do is just say npm run build. And what it does is it compiles everything together. It uses Webpack in the background behind the scenes, and it creates an optimized production build for you. And this build can then be, you just have to deploy the contents of this specific folder anywhere that you want. So you can put it on a static server, something like now.sh, or even an S3, Amazon S3, anywhere that you want to host. And that's it. So this is how you build a React application in its basic nutshell. So let's jump back to our presentation. So I hope you found that demo interesting. I'm sure you're excited about React and what it can bring to the table. So let me very quickly tell you what we at KnowledgeHut can do to help you master React and incorporate it into your enterprise. So the React curriculum, the React course that we have at KnowledgeHut, is what it looks like. So to begin with, we've got 32 hours of training content on our integrated platform. And this is a living curriculum, which means that we constantly keep evolving it. We learn from the market what the market wants, and we build new modules, new content all the time. So it's not a rigid curriculum that is dated. It's absolutely new. It features React 16.8 and above, and is built for 2020 and beyond. And as I said earlier, unlike typical online courses, we keep the curricula alive and ever evolving all the time. And besides all the latest features of React, such as React hooks, the suspense API, context, server-side rendering, you've got things like React router, Redux middleware, testing, and lots more. And we're not talking about a standard online course or simply just a live virtual class. So we've got multiple models at KnowledgeHut. So we offer courses as online self-learning courses. We offer them as hybrid learning model, where you have some part of the curriculum delivered as videos and the rest is as live virtual classes, where you actually get to interact with a mentor, an instructor, and you work in small batches with the mentor as you learn React. You also, all of this is backed with our outcome-based learning model. So this is our homegrown model that we've been working on for some time. And the whole idea is that as you're learning something, you need to be able to quantify your learning. and all the effort that you're putting in into comprehensive assessment reports and feedback. Specifically as an enterprise, if you're going to learn React and adopt it, you want to be able to monitor your team's progress in the curriculum and how they're faring. And this is also required for the instructor to be able to put in extra efforts wherever necessary to ensure that the training is delivered on its promise and it delivers. So our integrated assessments platform has been built specifically for this purpose. So you've got a host of assessment opportunities and activities built into the curriculum itself, and these are all adaptive, AI driven. And it's not, we don't want you to sit at your in your offices or at your homes and work through videos. Everything is hands-on. So you've got hands-on code labs which actually work from the comfort of your web browser. So we've got, as I said, we have our integrated platform, and that platform comes with an integrated IDE. So all the examples, all the assignments, and even the capstone project, everything can be done right within the web browser itself. Having said that, we offer complete flexibility in terms of delivery, and we customize the solution depending on the needs of the client. This particular course comes with 4 micro projects and a capstone. So the whole idea is that these are micro projects, and they give you a more realistic, well-rounded learning experience. We also offer mentored learning opportunities where you get to work one-on-one with exclusive mentors, including myself, as we sort of handhold you while you develop a production-worthy application. So to sum up, we are not talking about a run-of-the-mill program. We are talking about a complete experience. So I hope you'll learn React with us. Thank you so much.